Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session. I'm calling it a conversation. It's about the future of automated time blocking, and I'm Ray Sidney-Smith, and I am the community host of Personal Productivity Club, and I thought this would be a really fun thing to do. I know it's a little bit spur of the moment, so hopefully those of you who have been able to join are going to enjoy our conversation. But today what I wanted to do was to invite my friend and colleague, Francis Wade, to talk about the future of automated time blocking. He is hosting the Task Management and Time Blocking Summit at the end of this week, starting on Thursday, actually. And so Francis Wade is the author of Perfect Time-Based Productivity, the book. He's also the host of the upcoming conference, like I said, the Task Management and Time Blocking Virtual Summit, starting on March 4th. He's lived in Kingston, Jamaica since 2005, and he's an avid content creator. He's the newspaper columnist for the Jamaica Gleaner, I believe it is, and he's a cyclist. And so welcome to my conversation with you, Francis.
Great. The only thing you didn't mention was I was born in Cape Cod, which explains my accent.
Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation with you because what we're really going to do is to cover a bridge of sorts. We're going to cover quite a bit of topic here, but we're going to talk about what really the idea of scheduling tasks, very similar to scheduling events in one's calendar. We're going to talk about how auto scheduling has come to be and how it works, what kinds of tools are out there. Maybe we'll talk about some of those tools, and really what the future of automated time blocking looks like, really the topic of our discussion today, right? And so let's maybe start off with a little bit around the concept of what auto scheduling is, and I'll start off with a little bit of preamble here, which is to say that we're comfortable with the idea of scheduling calendar events. We know the idea. People have agendas, or they have some kind of planner, or they use a digital calendar, and they calendar things like meetings and appointments. And we have gone through, most of human history with some form of time tracking, and then we've had task managers in the form of task lists, as well as baked into day planners and so on and so forth. And there's been various bridgings of those two different components over time. And now here we are today, where we have technology really speeding forward that process into automating task management and automating calendar management. For example, there are calendar tools out there like Calendly that allow people to schedule appointments directly in your calendar without actually seeing the contents of your calendar. And so what you're really talking about is the blending of these two pieces now, bringing a task into the calendar view, but in an automated way. So can you explain for folks what an auto scheduler is? If you've never heard of what an auto scheduler is, can you explain what that is for folks? And then we'll get into the conversation.
Sure. The best way to describe it is to compare it to an administrative assistant. An administrative assistant precede the creation of, I think, calendars and even task lists. So an administrative assistant, a really good one, someone who works for you, is someone you give all your tasks to and you ask them to remember everything. And if they're very skillful and very powerful, they just tell you what to do and you just go and do it. And that's what kings and emperors and Attila the Huns and Alexander the Great, they all probably had someone who was doing this from time immemorial. Someone who automatically figured out, not automatically, but manually, mentally figured out what you needed to be doing on any given day. If you ever watch West Wing, and remember Jeb Bartlett, the president, he had a super secretary, admin assistant. Her name was Mrs. Landingham. And her job was pretty much just to tell him what to do. And he was more or less faithful in the sense that, he would change his mind now and again, but she knew better than he did what he had to do in the grand scheme of things. I mean, he knew policies, but she knew what he needed to do tomorrow at 2:00 when he didn't. So having that person is a bit like delegating your entire set of commitments, including some personal commitments. McKinsey did a study recently, and they showed that the presence of that person in an executive's life adds, I forget the multiple, but it adds multiples to their productivity. And companies have been skimping on admin assistants and then not wondering why their executives aren't as, or managers aren't as productive as they should be. So the idea of an auto scheduler is to essentially automate the reliability of a great admin assistant, is to manage your calendar, move all of the tasks around that can be moved around, keep the ones that should be fixed, and present you with a optimal suggestion as to what to do next. That stripped down to its basics is what we're trying, an auto scheduler is trying to accomplish. It's a robot that's trying to emulate the power of a great administrative assistant.
And so, what do you say to those who are in the space where they currently have those in different systems? That is, someone who has tasks managed in a task manager and someone who has a calendar that manages just their events and what they need to do on any given and specific time, right? In space time, in essence. Why do they feel the need to combine those two pieces together? What's the grand argument for that?
Well, if you have one task to do each day and one appointment per week, not a problem. You can manage it all up here. But at some point, as task volume grows, the burden of trying to remember, optimize, rejigger, make sure there are no overlaps, make sure there is enough time to drive from one place to the other. The work that takes an individual to keep lots of tasks and lots of appointments straight, at some point it rises above a threshold. So a 10-year-old doesn't have this problem because they have very few demands on their time, and they have parents and teachers and siblings, and they have structures to make sure that they're where they should be. But as you grow older, these people tend not to want to help you as much. And at some point in your teens, you need to develop your own routines, which may not be a problem if you, again, have a really small number of tasks and appointments. But as the number grows, if you're trying to manage them and they're split between different applications, you're going to have a problem because you're now going to be spending your mental energy, your mind, trying to track all these different commitments and making sure that they don't conflict. You know, David Allen said, your mind is for, I don't know if I'm going to quote him wrongly, mind is for having tasks, not Ray, what's the quote from David Allen?
Your mind is for your mind is for having ideas, not holding them.
Having ideas, not holding them. Great. So in this context, your mind is for creating tasks, not remembering them. As much as possible, the idea is that as task volume grows, you must delegate to some kind of system. And rather than have a task system over here and a calendar system over here and trying to remember and trying to balance and make sure that you don't overcommit and what am I supposed to do next week Friday and is to have it all in one place. And the auto schedulers bring them together in one place and do the optimizing for you the way an admin assistant would do it.
Right. And so the argument that I always have against auto scheduling is that you're gonna place a whole bunch of stuff into my calendar, and now you're gonna have time filled forward into perpetuity. What's the argument against that point? Because I've got a lot of stuff to do.
By killing you off. Well, there are limits to what auto schedulers can do, and typically they go 2 weeks out, so they don't go to infinity just because computing power won't allow it today. So there's a limit to what they can do. But essentially, you're trying to train a dumb robot to be like an administrative assistant. So a very bad auto scheduler, which doesn't give you a lot of options, doesn't allow you to do much training. But a sophisticated one, I happen to use SchedPal, it's just pretty sophisticated. It's of the ones I'm aware of recently, I did a study a couple of years ago, and it was the best at the time. They've made some improvements. The others have improved also, and there's some new ones. So I can't really say which one is the absolute best. But SchedPal 3.0 basically invites you to train it to deliver the suggested schedule that works for you. And in the beginning, it feels very chaotic because you haven't really figured out, this is a personal problem. You really don't know enough about your scheduling preferences when you start using an auto scheduler. It's after you start using it that you discover that you have all these hidden rules that have never been made explicit, and they now need to be made explicit because the auto scheduler needs to know what they are. So there's a bit of a training period where you go from not really understanding yourself and not really understanding how the auto scheduler works. So you start to you better understand yourself as time goes on. You better understand how the auto scheduler works. And then eventually there sort of becomes a union between the two where you have a perfectly trained robot that's doing exactly what you want to do.
So,
I know
so
that sounds
staying in,
utopian, but
yeah, yeah, and so I'm going to continue on the argument, right? Which is to say that so now you're scheduling 2 weeks out, and what am I doing with the rest of those tasks? Now I have all of these other tasks that are just sitting not scheduled. What happens to them?
so SchedPal, for example, will keep them and assign them the proper attributes and bring them out at the right time. I mean, in the future, maybe 2 weeks will become a month will become 6 months, but a good auto scheduler retains the attributes. Every day you ask it to optimize my schedule, it picks up another day at the end of the 2 weeks. And I'm not sure if 14 days is exactly the horizon it's using. Could be longer nowadays, but that's what it used to be. And every day you add a day, it optimizes that day also. And so it has us, in a way, it's a task manager. And it's tricky to think in terms of it being a calendar or a task manager because it's really its own thing, and it's doing functions that belong to both. So I wouldn't even say it's task manager plus calendar. It's another thing, and it's doing the functions of both.
Right. And so my again, I want to continue arguing this point because I think it's
Yeah,
really
yeah, yeah,
fascinating,
yeah, yeah.
and I want everybody to get the internal conflict that even I have over this concept, which is that if I look at my calendar every day, every evening after we're done, I'm going to finish my day, and then I'm going to sit down and I'm going to identify and do what SchedPal in essence does, right? And that time for me, I consider fruitful. That is productive time because I am planning out my day tomorrow, which every day for me changes. And not everybody's day does. So, there's that factor. But for me, every day changes. And so I want to be able to it's kind of like putting all of the chess pieces back on the board in the reset position, and then strategizing how your opponent is going to come at you the next day. And so with that information in mind, I'm now doing that. And what you're saying is that SchedPal is doing that for you. And to me, for some reason, that feels like it's taking away a bit of my own agency. What does that feel like for you?
Oh, I wish it did that, but no, no, no. It's more like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Think of SchedPal as a suggestion machine where you're still the one who's making all the decisions. You're crafting the day. And SchedPal uses what it knows to suggest to you what it thinks is an optimal schedule based on its information. Of course, SchedPal doesn't have all the information. It doesn't know that tomorrow you're feeling tired and you want to sleep in.
Right.
So it'll schedule something in that spot. As soon as it schedules it, you'll reject the suggestion and say, "Well, no, thank you. I don't want to actually get up at 5 and run the 10 miles that I thought I wanted to. Instead, I'll sleep in and I'll check my email at 9 and I'll block my calendar until 9." So all you do is you tell SchedPal, "No, I'm not going to block that time," and then it says, "Okay, fine." Bing. And then it may say something like, "Oh, but you need to get back to this person before 9." And then you say, "Oh, that's true. Let me do that now." Bing. And you click it off, done. SchedPal reoptimizes. And so it's taking the heavy work of having to look at all your tasks, but it definitely isn't forcing you to do anything. It's more like a little person on your shoulder who's saying, "Okay, let me see what I can do with that." Bing. And then it comes back with a suggestion. And then you say, "Well, And most of the times it comes back with a suggestion that doesn't work for reasons that you have. And then you change, you go in and then it goes back again and ding. It's the scurrying back and forth that it takes away. The painful part of what you described. There's a creative part which I also very much like, of crafting each day and thinking about my intentions and how to fulfill them. Schedpal is just an assistant that does the part that's tedious, boring, doesn't add a lot of value, and it actually takes a lot of energy, unnecessary energy.
So when we think about it from that perspective, right? The idea then is that let me think about something like Timeful, which was bought by Google and then baked into Google Calendar. And ultimately, it has become what is now known, I think, as Google Goals. So you can identify a goal in your Google Calendar, and say I want to meditate 5 times a week. I suggest 7, but 5. And so let's start off with a few days of wiggle room there, a couple days of wiggle room. And so what you then do is you say, okay, I want to set this at typically in the mornings. What then the Timeful engine, which is now Google Calendar Goals engine, will now place it in that time, and you actually say, I did this or later. So later or did it. Those are the two toggles, true or false. If I did it, great, checked off, and now it confirms that information in the back end of the system. And then it will, when you need to say later, it will disappear from the calendar because you didn't do it, or you're not going to do it, and then it will again do that back end engine work, and now it will try to put it into future weeks in times when it thinks you will do it. And now if you block out the whole morning, it's not going to put it in there at all because you've blocked out the morning. And so through time, it's trying to anticipate when you are going to do something. And it sounds to me like what Schedpal is doing is a little bit more sophisticated, but more in the discretionary task spot than for the habitual thing that you want to do on a regular basis. Does that
Right.
does that make sense?
You're talking about machine learning. So Schedpal and others use narrow AI. So far, there's not and I include Google Goals in that and Timeful. There's not an app that uses machine learning very well. I don't think there's. I tried Google Goals myself a few years ago, and disaster, didn't work at all. And I think that our understanding of task management isn't advanced enough for us to take advantage of machine learning. The explanations I've seen of apps that try to do it strike me as very crude. We're back here just trying to have calendars that are feasible. That's a basic requirement before you get into learning based on past history. So I think that the aspirations to use machine learning in the way that you described are years off. The challenges that we're having are way more basic, way more normal, and way more day to day. A great admin assistant would start off by being able to optimize your schedule, and over time he or she would learn your preferences and then react accordingly. But that comes a long time after they've proven themselves. You'd fire them if they couldn't put together a decent schedule, because that's more basic, and that's more of the basic challenge that the auto schedulers are tackling. So we're sort of back in the early days, and we're way off from benefiting from that kind of machine learning. We're, as I said, maybe 5 years away, more than that.
And I would give a different view, which is to say that Google Goals, for me, for example, works really well. And maybe it's just because I'm using it currently, and Google knows everything about me. So hi, Google. Like,
Hey, there's a mention on Facebook.
right, exactly. Like, I mean, really, Google. I mean, Google has so much of my world. It has both my personal and business world in its coffers. And the idea behind me trusting a database, or many databases with my information, is a trade-off. In many ways. But the flip side, the positive side to this, is that the system knows so much about me that I'm capable of recognizing that it can help me in this particular regard. And so I'm a yoga practitioner, and so I want to know when I'm going to be most likely, to do yoga. And it has high accuracy. I mean, it knows down to the half hour, the time to put it in terms of time slot. And so
based on history or based on calendar?
both, because it's looking at both of those things.
That's scary.
Right. right?
The bit you mentioned before about the auto scheduler control you is that doesn't concern me, but this part concerns me. This part is scary. This is like I wonder. I need to go back and try Google and see if it knows stuff about me that I don't know.
But if we there was I don't know if this was actually true, and maybe it was debunked, but the idea behind the major EMV, Europay, Mastercard, Visa, the major credit card companies, they know so much information about you that they're capable of predicting future life events, right? So they can predict marriages, divorces, those kinds of things. Yeah, I mean, based on your eating habits, sure. If you're buying the same kinds of rubbish every week, perhaps there is a way to figure out the modal average, or the range in which you're going to have a cardiac event, right? But the idea here for me is that if machine learning has come of age, which it really has, the real missing element here is that people have not put enough data into the machine in order for it to learn. The point in which we have done that, then becomes the point in which it becomes the competent assistant that we all need it to be. And so that's where I'm kind of navigating toward is the future of automated time blocking really that space where it gets enough of our data. For example, Google knows everything in my Google Drive. Google knows everything in my calendar, right? It knows everything in my contacts. It knows every person who's contacted me because of that.
It's scaring me. Because I'm still a free Gmail user, so it's eating up all of that information, and
of course,
it's making sense of it.
Of course, but it's making sense of it in a dumb way, right? Like it's making sense of it in a very, very, very low level way because you haven't asked it to do things that are more sophisticated, and you can, right?
Alexa, when am I likely to have a heart attack? 2040, May 31st.
So Madam A, we don't trigger anybody's assistance in the background. Big G, Madam A, no triggering anyone's poor assistance in the background. But like continuing in this vein, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we are considering the fact that when we address automation, there needs to be enough data. You also noted a first criterion there, which is that we need to know ourselves more than we do when we approach the software. I think that's really critical here. So if we know ourselves well enough, we create the right amount of data for the system to be able to utilize, which is just maybe a list of tasks and our list of calendar events. It could be as simple as that, but it could also be more rich. There could be other metadata like your contacts, your email traffic, your online storage. Those things all inform what you last worked on, how you're working on it. And so there's this much richer ecosystem of data about you that can really help you understand what's going on in your world.
Well, I've time tracked my time usage for 20 years or something like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure Google or whatever engine would love to feast on my data. It's not on the internet. Well, is it? It probably is, but for all I know, because I'm backing it up somewhere. So
if you've backed it up to the cloud, then yeah, it's up there somewhere.
It's there somewhere, but if they could get a hold of it, they could actually make a lot of sense of it. That's more accurate. My time usage data is more accurate than my past calendar, because that's really where I spent my time. Just because SchedPal told me to do something doesn't mean I actually do it. I just ignore it and just go ahead and do what I need to do. It's my time usage data, but most people don't track their time. So hence my thinking that we're ways off, because the discipline it takes to track your time isn't just a matter of tracking what your laptop or your PC or your Mac does or your phone does, because so much of what we do is away from the immediate inputs into a device. Probably in any given day, a half to a quarter of my time, approximately, or in a working day, let's say half, I have to input manually because I'm not literally in front of something doing something. I'm doing something somewhere else, like I'm on a landline phone or I'm meeting with someone in my team. Those things aren't if they're not scheduled and if they're not captured, I take a nap, I have lunch. Those things aren't, they're not in my schedule. They're in my time tracking. And that's more accurate.
Right.
And that's,
So
there's a huge jump between the two for most people.
yeah, and I think completeness of the data is really important. So that is important. Julie's asking a really interesting piece here. So she says, so many of our inputs and obligations come into our day after we've planned it, right? The day comes at us. If urgent ad hoc tasks come into our lives via email or otherwise, stopping to act on the task seems like it would take less time than adding it to the auto scheduler. So in essence, we're being responsive as opposed to working on the planned work. And so how do you know when to stop and schedule the incoming task midday versus telling the auto schedule you're not going to do what it is you were telling it to do, it's telling you to do because you're doing the newly arrived task? How do you manage those pieces?
Right, right. So the first versions of SchedPal, there was a whole different app that you had to open to do this, an app on your laptop or on your phone. So you'd have to launch the app, wait a few seconds, input it, hit the auto schedule button. It takes 2 seconds, and then bam, you'd have a new schedule. So that's improved. So today, the app is actually in the web on a website. It's now an internet app. So you can get in way more quickly. You can get in much more, and then do what Julie said. But ultimately, where we're going to is, Alexa, block the next half an hour for me and optimize my schedule and tell me what's next when I'm finished. That's what's
Madam
next,
A,
right?
Madam A, sir, Madam A. There are people listening with their unfortunate voice assistants triggering Madam A.
Oh, okay, that's why you said that. Okay, all right. Madam A. Their Alexa is now telling them what to do.
Yes, I'm one of
Madam
those
A.
poor. I'm one of those poor people who, when I'm listening to something and I hear someone trigger their Google Assistant or their Alexa, Madam A devices,
Madam A.
I'm the one cursing those people. So yes,
Okay,
let's. Okay, anyway, so
that's
but
what you want to
so
have happen. So to answer Julie's question, it, the next step will be to have it work as simply as that. So auto schedulers will be built into the Internet of Things, right? So that's where it's ultimately headed. There won't be all this input. There'll just be, Madam A, I want to do this instead of anything else. Reschedule the rest of it and tell me what's next when I'm done. And that'll take 10 seconds. And bam, when you're done, it'll say, if you're finished now, it's time to send email to Ray. Matter of fact, you won't even see your calendar in the future, right? It'll just tell you the next thing. It'll be like your administrative assistant. You won't have to do all that mess that we have to do today. It'll just tell me, well, Madam A, what should I do? What should I do next? No, I don't want to do that. What's the next best thing? No, I don't want to do that either. What's the next best thing? Okay, I'll do that now. That's where we're headed. It's just the engine for doing that, as far as I know today, isn't connected to Madam A in a way that, but there are futuristic videos I've seen which interweave the power of an auto scheduler into everyday life so that you don't even see the auto scheduler. It's totally invisible. It's built into the fridge. The fridge says you need to go shopping. You have 2 hours to do so on Friday between 6 and 8. Here are the items that you need. I mean, those things, they're not rocket science. It's just the connection between the devices isn't there yet, but it will have to be in order for us to live our best lives, because we all have more commitments than we have time available. And there's somewhere in our ecosystem, not in our heads, but somewhere in our ecosystem, that's the trade-offs need to be made and the suggestion needs to be offered.
yeah, so I want to. We're going to come back to the future, and I'm really keen on that. But Matt Plummer's asking here: does auto scheduling primarily work and offer benefits for recurring tasks versus one-off tasks? So the idea that in your system, if you have something that's happening on an ongoing basis, akin to the Google Calendar goals, this is something that's the same thing repeating over and over again. So it has a better chance of being able to show up in my calendar because I want to do it repetitively around the same time of day. Is that better for the calendar, or is it more for these one-off kind of ad hoc tasks?
Boy, it's both. I don't think there's a distinction between it being better for one or the other. In the heat of the moment, you don't really care if it's recurring or a one-off. In the heat of the moment, you just want the best suggestion, right?
But if
Whether
you're
it's
trying
something you
to,
always do or something you're doing just once.
right, but if it's recurring, that means there's more data. If I'm going to call Susan once in
Oh,
history,
from a machine learning point of view.
probably, right?
Yeah, but because you do something frequently doesn't mean you want to do it now.
No, but the system will know better over time when I'm going to do that something.
But this gets to that piece about us knowing ourselves
Hmm.
and bringing it to the device that's trying to do the optimizing. My impression of the way I work is I don't care that I've always done it at 6 o'clock. If you're telling me that I need to do it because I've always done it and I don't want to do it now, it's a defect, plain and simple. I don't want the suggestion just
Right.
because I've always done it. So I prefer not to have it. So that's where a little bit, because it knows a little bit, it may assume too much, and that's where it becomes intrusive in my mind. That's where I want my creativity to remain with me.
So you're
I
saying,
don't,
Matt
I don't
has
really
the
want
follow-up question.
predictions.
Right. So it's saying, does it make better decisions? And you're saying that possibly no. And I'm arguing that possibly yes, it is making better decisions if it has a recurring task in the system. Because it has more data, it's more likely to present me with the right time, and that the fewer times when it shows me the right task at the wrong time, and I reject it, that to me is not a defect, right? Because I'm hoping that, like my assistant, my human assistant, when she says, "Hey Ray, do you really have enough time to do this in your day today?" And I say, "Oh, no, I know I don't. Let's move it to another day." She knows more about me, and she's able to step outside of my emotional world, my illogical, irrational world, which is my experience of the world. And so the machine it's disregards my emotional state, which is good in one side and bad in the other. How do we rationalize those pieces?
I think the question you asked is more of an auto scheduling question. Do you have enough time? There's an objective answer to that. However, Ray, it's 6 o'clock. Why don't you go running now? Now, if you have no intention to go running, the suggestion to me grates on me at that point. I don't want it. I don't need it. I can figure that part out in terms of my preferences in the moment. If I haven't scheduled it and you're guessing that I like to do it because you've seen my pattern, then it's not a matter of probabilistically is it going to be correct or not correct. It may very well be correct 75% of the time, but it's the 25% of the time I don't want the suggestion. It's like having a spouse who nags you about something that you don't really want to do,
Hmm.
and so why don't you take out the garbage now? You're like,
Right.
so it's there's more to it's really the emotional rejection. It's an emotional rejection that I'm making because I want to retain my autonomy. I don't want suggestions when I am not asking for something in my schedule. This is just
So
me.
so this is where I think the concept bifurcates to the idea that what you're saying is you want the things that you are going to do, representing a task list of things that you're going to do in the auto scheduling world, versus coaching, which is something that is prompting you to potentially stretch beyond what you literally are going to do.
Exactly. I don't trust a robot coach to
Yet.
you know
Not the overlords. I'm not going there. I'm just saying
time
yet.
to check your going for your prostate examination. Well, time for your colonoscopy. It could save a life, but would I want it to be telling me these things? Probably not. Yeah, probably I wouldn't. I I don't think I want it. Right now, it could change, but this is what I've seen with the machine learning is that it produces not necessarily. illogical suggestions, but more like unwanted advice. And who wants to have someone coaching them when you're not you haven't paid them to coach you. No, nobody likes to have somebody say, "Hey Ray, you know what you really should do with your life?" It's kind of like, who are you? And if
I would argue that
Madam
there are
A,
actually a group of people out there who do want the it's the reason why we have mythology. It gives us an escape. And I think that there is a reason for people to be able to say, the machine told me to do this now. And so you know what I mean? Like, and it's not quite in that vein, but it's more in
yeah,
the
yeah,
sense
yeah,
that
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
you get to say to something, I want to do something like, start writing this book. I just need to start writing the book. And if it prompts you enough, then one of those times you're going to go ahead and start writing the book, just probabilistically. And so it gives you that option. Plus, if you don't do it, you can say, well, that's the machine. That's Rosie the robot from the Jetsons, right? It's like she's a bypass valve for comedic effect, but she's also a competent character
Uh-huh.
that becomes a scapegoat that doesn't harm anyone. If you don't
All right,
believe that she's truly AI.
I'll play along with it with the idea. So
Yeah.
I play, as you know, but for listeners, I use Zwift, which is a stay-at-home riding game. So you ride on a trainer and it measures your speed, and you're watching a screen of thousands of other people and you're
You're
racing them.
competing.
And
You're
like,
competing with others.
sometimes competing,
Yeah.
sometimes just riding, sometimes just having
Okay. Okay.
fun, but different kinds of rides. So if there were a coach built into it and you could enable it or disable it, I would love to have a coach in Zwift say, I've looked at your past rides. I think you should take this kind of ride and try this kind of thing. And in that way, you'd be able to increase your FTP, which is a measure of your wattage, and by so much by September 1st. Is that a decent plan? Would you like to go with it? So if I turned on the coach and the coach gave that kind of advice, sure. But to have Madam A start to sort of chime in and, with all kinds of unwanted advice about relationships and have you called your mother yet? The answer is no. And especially if it were, they could give advice on a million things that I don't want. And if I couldn't choose the ones that I do want and turn off the other ones, I think I would throw the thing into the garbage. But the questions we're asking are extremely pertinent because these are coming to us. These are not. This is only science fiction because we're a bit early in the game. All the things that we're talking about are easy to imagine, and there are already people who are trying to do some of these things, and it's only a matter of time before they figure out the interfaces and they're seamlessly interfaced with Madam A, takes away all the friction that Julie asked about. And all of a sudden it becomes easy to have this kind of give and take. And where will the line be drawn and by whom? That's going to become an issue just as soon as Madam A figures out how to tie into your schedule or your auto schedule.
So I think I'm
Sure.
asking a question that you from Frank is asking a question. Hi Frank. He's
Hi,
asking a
Frank.
question about the app, and I'm presuming he means SkedPal and whether there's a mobile application for SkedPal.
There's a mobile application for SkedPal 2.0 and everything below 3. There's not one for 3.0 and above yet, but again,
Is it
matter
is
of
it a
time.
progressive web application? So are you capable of is it mobile responsive so you can use it in a mobile browser?
Have not tried it, and I don't
Okay.
think so.
Okay. And so again, just to give some context here, you're talking about SkedPal because you think it's the best, but there are several others in the market that are in that space. So there's applications like Sorted and others. What are some of those others in the space?
Oh, I have a mega list here, as I would, right? So there's Focuster, Flux Speed Schedules, Future Render, Butler Roy, Reclaim.ai, Taskline, The newest one I've heard of is called Yomez. Then there are a few that claim to be auto schedulers, and when you actually dig below the surface, you realize they're not. There are some that have been discontinued. Sheldon Eyes, Above and Beyond, Self Planner, Time to. Those are the ones that have been discontinued, or they're no longer marketing them, or they're not keeping up. They're not no Windows 10 versions.
Right. So I only care about I only care about the ones that are actually working and useful to people. So
Yeah,
so
the ones that
let's
I
focus.
mentioned.
So Butleroy, you said
Butleroy, Reclaim.ai,
Reclaim.ai. Okay.
Taskline is going to be featured. The inventor of Taskline is going to be speaking at the summit this week. Yomez, Future Render, Flux Speed Schedules, I think may still be being used and being offered. I've seen talk of a few others, but some of them are in beta. Some I can't tell if they're actually active or not. There's no updates. There's no one saying that they're using them, but it's
Right.
about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
So from my perspective,
9.
we're still in the very early days of
Oh yeah.
this technology. And it's
yeah.
remarkable to me only because we are fairly far along in certain verticals when it comes to machine learning. And really, I think we can presuppose confidently that the ability for task management and time management to be blended together truly in a tool really requires machine learning to be competent, and that it has enough data to be able to make those kinds of guesses. Whether or not you have the preferential treatment of coach, what we're calling coaching right now, which is something that is providing guidance versus something that is literal task list items, right? My frequent statement is that you either have a task list or a wish list. A task list are the things you're going to do. A wish list are the things that you put on top of a task list to make it inoperable. And so we want to make sure that the things that we're putting on our lists that are tasks are things we will do. If you're going to do one thing, put one thing on the list. If you're going to wish you're going to do 5 things, don't put those on the list. Put the one thing on the list. Right? It's really important. And so the key there for you is that you're putting things into the scheduler that are auto scheduling things you will do, not things that you might, would, could, should do. Right? And so sort of you're shooting all over the thing. Right?
You can do that too, though. It's just
okay, but now you're blurring the
yeah,
the argument.
Distinction doesn't exist. The one you created is nice, but it's not factual.
But you're saying that you don't like the idea of the defect of something giving
Right.
you preference.
Right, but this is where the blurring exists. Remember, I said that an auto scheduler is a whole different thing.
Yeah.
So you can throw anything in an auto schedule, and with the right attributes, it won't schedule it, but it has it. It's just that it won't actually put it in your schedule. Like, it may be because it's never a high enough priority to do it. It may be because you say keep it but don't schedule it. But whatever. But
Okay.
so it's not trying to schedule everything. It's scheduling a subset of all of the tasks that it stores in its database. So that way it's not behaving like a task manager or a calendar. It's a different thing, so to speak. Has its own.
So how do you do
rationale.
how do you do the things that are sitting in that repository that are not getting scheduled? It just kind of backs up.
Yeah. If you want to, you can do that. I clean mine out, but some people
Okay.
would end up with 1,000 wish list items, and for them, there's more peace of mind to having 1,000 items in their wish list, but not scheduling them, than there is to not having the wish list at all. It has a psychological. You feel kind of better because it's there. It's not taking up any space. You don't actually see them. It's just somewhere.
Right. So let me give a little bit of background here, and then I want to move into maybe answering what Frank is asking in the chat, which is that the way in which I currently have my system is designed so that I'm managing from a calendar perspective most of my day. And I do that by tying my task manager to my calendar so that it can synchronize and I can see my tasks for the day in my calendar and see my events, obviously, that are in the calendar event. And as a GTD practitioner, I abide by the general provisions, the guidelines of getting things done, which is that things that are day reference show up in my calendar, places that I need to be, that is events or calendar items that are meetings or otherwise, show up in the calendar interface, and things that I need to do at a specific date and time as well show up in the calendar interface. But on top of that, I have other tasks that I decide go into particular places because they might fit into biological prime time. They may fit into the right place where I'm in the mood to do them. Like I like writing very early in the morning and then in the late afternoon, right? So I know to place those tasks in there, but I'm not placing them permanently in that space. If I don't do them, then they get removed manually by me to some future date and time, because I know that my day can change on a dime. Things can happen. That's just the nature of my work. And so because I know my work style, that's how it goes. And this leads me to my point, which is that I have tools that allow people to schedule directly in my calendar, and my staff also schedules time directly in my calendar. In essence, I don't have time to deal with my calendar, so other people deal with my calendar through this facilitated technology. And so where does that come into play when it comes to the future of automated time blocking, in the sense that what it sounds like what SchedPal is doing is automated task scheduling, not necessarily automated time blocking. And I'm curious where the future of that goes. Will these tools like Calendly, which is what Frank is talking about. I use a tool called OnceHub, but I'm actually probably going to move that into another bespoke tool that's built into my website. And right now, I've given it all of these guidelines, guardrails, so that people cannot take too much time. They have to be approved. I get a chance to, one of my team members has the ability to move that time if it doesn't quite fit. We can nudge it to another time. We can choose a completely different day. So we have control over the process. It's facilitated, but it is not automated completely. And I'm choosing to put things in my calendar on top of the fact that Google's also deciding when I'm going to, say run, do yoga. All of the things that are mostly health and fitness related are basically managed by Google, because it will know it. And I also have the backup piece there, which is I know I'm going to take a shower today, right? I don't need Google to necessarily do that, but it's nice that the time is taken in my in a la, say, Dr. Neil Fiore and the unschedule. I know the time is going to be taken, so it's going to be done. But I want to see it represented so that other people who are also looking at my calendar, who I've given secure access to my calendar, also know that stuff is there, so they don't try and take up time. I don't want an appointment at 5 a.m., but that could happen if I don't put the right guardrails in for myself.
Right.
So what does that future look like when other people can schedule into your calendar?
I hate that capability, but the if they're in your team, if they're friends and not foes, then you could have them use an auto scheduler. So you may never touch one, but they could use the auto scheduler if they have the freedom to optimize your schedule. If they're putting their hands inside your schedule and moving things around themselves, then an auto scheduler could just be a tool that they use so that nothing falls through the cracks. So you may never see it. Because really all you need at the end of the day is a suggestion. You just need a great suggestion. You just need, what do I do now? Or what am I doing at 6? You just need, wherever it comes from, someone using an auto scheduler or the auto scheduler itself may not matter to you. So if they're the ones you're saying scheduling stuff for you and with in your calendar, then that's fine. I think that's a matter of training them and them using whatever tool they use. However, other people putting time in your calendar, like colleagues, or I advise against it. That's crazy making. And sure, they can make a meeting request, but I know there are some companies where if someone can actually book time in your calendar and it's not seen as the correct thing to turn them down. That's crazy making. That's
see, I see it on the flip side, because if someone's booking time in my calendar, they're paying me. So book all the time you want. You know, that's not. I don't. You know, like I do enough in my charitable life that I don't have to worry about that. You know, like when a client is booking time, that is billable time. It's not like I'm you know, so that guardrail for me is not a barrier to entry. And so the idea that people are booking in my calendar is actually quite fruitful for me. And so then the other side to that is it's actually the people who are capable of booking in your calendar who are not paying you for that time. That's the part you're really concerned about. And that where it becomes
I'd
an
be concerned about
overreach.
both. I don't. There are clients who you don't want to talk to at 5 o'clock on a Friday, right?
Yeah, so take it to a therapist, right? A therapist has a schedule. They have a very clear schedule, and they get paid for their time with their clients, whether you're a counselor, a therapist, or otherwise. And so every hour booked is an hour paid, and it's a one-to-one business, right? You know, unless you're doing group therapy or something like that, it's, you know, you're scheduling time with a group of people. That is, I don't think that's a problem, to have someone who is booking
Well,
and paying
remember,
for that time, as long as you have the appropriate preferences in the calendar scheduler design, so that's
uh,
not booking it
remember,
at.
there's all this research that shows that you make better decisions. Judges make better decisions in the morning than after lunch.
Right.
And if you're
Well,
going to go your
right
first
before lunch. Right
right
before
before
lunch.
lunch,
They, yeah, you're getting convicted if you meet the judge right before
you're
lunch.
dead.
You're done.
So presumably, a therapist gives better advice at some parts of the day than others. And a
Hmm.
particularly tricky client that books a time at a time when you know, like 5 o'clock on a Friday, when your brain is basically half dead, you probably don't want to accept so there are other factors as well that are very human. It's not just a matter of I'll take whoever will pay me whenever, as long as the slot is open. No, you're human. You have all these idiosyncrasies and you have all these preferences and they come into play.
Yeah.
So yes and no. There's always, at the end of the day, you're always a decider. But even in the case where you're earning money, I think it's still a suggestion. You don't give your time away to everyone who will pay. I hope.
No, no, and so
Right.
you're absolutely right, which is that there are many guardrails between the point in which someone is until someone is capable of scheduling in my calendar. Not everybody has access to that link. Not everybody can schedule. And even if you did, it would be rejected summarily if you didn't fit those criteria. Like, for example, if some random person off the street then scheduled time in my calendar, if they weren't already a client and in the system, and, you know, there's a whole bunch of things that would just be automatically rejected by the system because their email address and otherwise don't match the criteria that we've created for security purposes. So,
Right.
so there's a lot in there that I
Right.
think it's good for you to note, like, state affirmatively, which is yes, we have a lot of layers of provisioning before someone can schedule. But
Right.
once they get into that space, then I have the conversation with clients, only schedule with me in the mornings on
Right.
Thursdays, because that's going to be
Right.
our best time to meet. Or,
Right.
for example, there
Right.
are certain clients that I do not meet on particular days, so they're
Right.
only allowed to book in those days. So there's
Right.
all of that stuff, and yeah, it's good to make sure that it's explicit for folks to
This is actually a
recognize.
good example of, as you start to get into auto scheduling, these guardrails, as you put them, become more apparent. They become more obvious, and the unwritten ones and the unsaid ones and the assumptions and the presumptions, they all actually now have to play a role, an explicit role. And hopefully at the end of your this period of introspection, not that it perhaps never ever ends, but in the beginning there's a lot of introspection. When you start using an auto scheduler, you're really asking yourself and answering questions around your preferences that you've never really asked and answered before, not explicitly. You now need to turn them into rules that a system can use, or even an administrative assistant. I think the same thing happens with them. It's just that they're a bit smarter and they're more human. They can pick up when you look upset. They pick up when you're tired. So they start to make these adjustments oh no, Mr. Ray is always upset at 5 o'clock on a Friday, so don't schedule any time for him, even though he hasn't said anything. I see his face, so I know that I'm not going to schedule any time.
And they
So,
should, and it should never call me Mr. Ray.
but they're doing these things, but
Right,
in
right,
an
right.
auto scheduling, you've got to make them explicit because,
Yeah,
like we said, these things really are coming.
yeah.
We there will be a point where we won't have a choice but to interact with something that's being driven by an auto scheduler. It's just coming, and the best we can do is sort of get our head into the space and start to say, okay, what 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 would I need to bring to the party so that I can train my robot so that it works better than not.
So in the last few minutes together, and I really appreciate you
Oh
spending
wow,
this time with us.
time.
I know time flies, right? I wanna give people like what we should do to prepare for this future, where at some point technology will start to do more for us in this way, and we want to be prepared for that future. What are the things that you can think of just off the top of your head that we can do to get us prepared for that for tomorrow?
Yeah, imagine, and this is the advice for the time blocking summit, the attendees this week. Imagine a life where you have twice or three times as many tasks to manage at any one given moment in time. Now, solve that problem for yourself because it may require that you start time blocking, for example, if you're not time blocking, or you start using the auto schedule as it exists, even though you're time blocking using a calendar. So think about the upgrades that will be driven by an increase in task volume. So if you think in those futuristic terms just for yourself, there are answers out there right now and ways in which you can adjust your system for an increase in task volume and think it through and start to make the changes so that you're prepared for a time when having Madam A in our life is Madam A, if she's going to suggest stuff to us that we didn't think of, then that's going to increase the number of tasks that we are going to have to be managing. So that's my advice. Prepare yourself for double, triple the number of tasks and think about scaling up.
So number one, Big G is going to take over the world in terms of Big G, way more than Madame A. So while Amazon has done a really good job in scaling out the Echo device platform, there's no question that Big G will be the dominant assistant, voice assistant at least, in on the planet, if it isn't already. And we'll see as Apple's assistant moves forward as well as Madame A. But so let's just clear that one up for anybody who is hearing Francis say Madam A lot. Just know that the reality is what reality is. Android is the dominant operating system on the planet on mobile devices. So let's be real about it. But what I heard you say were some really important features, some really important components to preparing for the future. One is to start to recognize, become aware of your own work style and your own preferences. And the more that you're able to enumerate those, the more likely you are to be able to then dictate that to the robots, right? To whatever device, whatever tool, whatever externality, being able to itemize that explicitly is going to be useful to you in the future. Would you say that's
But
a
I,
true
but I,
statement?
well, I add the part in about doubling the tasks because ultimately I think there's going to be some pain that needs to drive the improvements that you make. It's not going to come from just wanting to be a good person and wanting to do better. I think that as you think about doubling and tripling, you start to think about, oh my goodness, there's going to be a return of some unwanted symptoms. There's going to be stuff falling through the cracks. There's going to be me scrambling. There's going to be putting on weight. There's going to be me not spending enough time with my kids. So I think pain is a stronger driver in this case. That this is where everyone's life is headed, and if you get there before others, you'll have less pain. So I'm more of a drive yourself using a painful imagination than just the good feelings that you get from being a good citizen and a good person doing the right thing.
and I'm gonna I'm gonna flip it again because I'm gonna give the different view on this, which is I don't believe that we should be. It's kind of like the difference between the way in which we look at pathology in psychology today versus positive psychology. If we look at the positive future outcomes as the metric for being able to or the future outcomes that we want to be positive, then that's better than looking at all of the pain. Fear-based motivations are useful, right? For a child putting their hand on the stove, or a child stepping out off the curb into oncoming traffic. There is an amount of that kind of violence, really, that is necessary for protecting. Beyond that, though, there are those of us like myself. I value what you're saying. You know that. But on the flip side of that, I really believe we need to move beyond that as humans and start thinking about this from a non-fear based perspective, and really looking at this from an abundance based perspective, which is that I could do 3 times the number of tasks that I'm currently doing if I have the right pieces in place, the right components in place, the right tools, strategies, tactics in place. And that's where I'm coming at from this. And I think that the idea of enumerating, the idea of itemizing the way in which we work, the way in which we like to work, and what the outcomes we want are, that gives us a better understanding of when something's working for us and when it's not. And that gives us the opportunity to optimize.
I take the word fear out of it, and I just say consequences. So if you look at how your own task volume has increased from when you were in the 90s, when you were a professional in the 90s, you'll probably see that the number of tasks that you need to manage today is dramatically different than way back then. Back then you had a day runner and it had 1 page of tasks, and that was good enough. And that's probably not good, probably not good enough today. So if only in terms of consequences, it's to use a positive psychology maybe approach, is that you're better off preparing for the consequences of what you want and making a way for it to happen. So if you want to affect climate change, that's a big commitment. And people who are really serious about those big commitments tend to generate lots of projects and lots of tasks. And as they increase their capacity, they're able to better affect climate change, which is what they really want. So the consequence of having a big aspiration is that you need a big engine in order to move at the speed and have the capacity to accomplish these big things. So I don't mean to necessarily say that you will be afraid. It's just that the consequences of, being someone who cares a lot is that you assign yourself lots to do. And if you want to be effective in making change, well, you got to find a way to somehow manage all these tasks that you have now assigned yourself. And the best way to do that is, like you said, with understanding strengths, weaknesses, habits, practices, technologies, bringing them all to play in a way that allows you to accomplish your deepest dreams.
Fantastic. So, thank you so much for joining me here for this conversation. This is something that I've wanted to do for quite some time, and I think I'm going to probably make this a regular thing inside of the co-working space in personal productivity. So it's something for me to think about. But I'm glad that you prompted me for us to have this conversation before the Time Blocking Summit. So tell folks a little bit about the Time Blocking Summit and what they can experience before we close out. I want to be respectful of people's time, and so let us know a little bit about the Time Blocking Summit. I'm going to put up on the screen the
Nice.
URL to register, but tell us a little bit about it, and then let's close out.
So the summit is intended to produce a transformation that you come in thinking, acting, behaving in a particular way, and you leave different. Now, how do we accomplish the different? We have 30 something speakers and a number of live sessions, a whole bunch of pre-recordings, and an active community for you to engage in as you engage in the entire 3 days. And there's also a structure that we've set up, which says that wherever you are today, we want you to evaluate your current structure and then listen to all the live sessions and the pre-recordings with a view to how can I move to the next level? Kind of using, for example, the idea that we just said, which is what would a doubling or tripling of my tasks actually call me to do? And what could I accomplish if I actually had that? It's really committed people who take on the question of how do I become more capable in my task management so that I can accomplish my deepest and my most dearest commitments? really the most committed people on the planet who are willing to look at that level. And we'll offer lots of practical advice to help you accomplish that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Francis, for
You're
joining me
welcome.
here in
Pleasure.
conversation. And I'm looking forward to the Task Management and Time Blocking Summit.
Right. That's March 4th to 6th, which is day after tomorrow. And Ray will be there right at the almost at the very beginning. Just about at the very beginning to say hello.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, Francis.
Great. Thanks, Ray. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. That was my conversation with Francis Wade around the future of time blocking, and I'm looking forward to having more conversation around this because it's one of these like hairy topics that continually comes up in my own world of thinking, should I be using an auto scheduler? Should I be time blocking and all of these other things? And it'll be interesting to see what comes of the sessions at the Time Blocking Summit. Some of you who are speaking at the summit were here today, and so good to see you all. And I'm looking forward to the Task Management and Time Blocking Summit. And I'm looking forward to doing more of these in conversation, maybe virtual fireside chats with more people and talking to them about things that I find to be hairy, gnarly problems, challenges, and discussions in the personal productivity space. So again, thank you all for joining us this evening for the conversation on the future of automated time blocking. I'm Ray Sidney-Smith, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.